Hi and welcome to one of my project feature videos that I'm hoping to do more of, where I'm just going to be talking about one of my knitting projects from start till finish. I have a lot of pregnant people in my life, and maybe by the time this video comes out they all have given birth, and I usually just like to knit for myself, but I think some of these people should receive a little something. So I am knitting a couple of baby knits, and I wanted to make a video of one of those projects. And this is the Clara dress, which I actually have made before, about 5-6 years ago or so, maybe longer, maybe less. And it's really cute, but there's a lot of things that are interesting about this particular dress because it's kind of unclear what the origin is and who designed it. It's like a whole thing. Some refer to it as the Agnes dress because it seems like the earliest version of the pattern that we can find is designed by a Agnes from my hometown Trondheim. So how about that? But nowadays the most popular version of this pattern that you can find is the Clara dress from Isager. And it's a little bit of a controversy I've gathered from having browsed some of the Ravelry projects for this dress. Some are, showing, hey, this pattern came out before and it was by this designer, and hey, I've written out this whole pattern for you because it's no longer like copyright protected and shared for free. It's like a whole thing. And also Ravelry projects for this dress are full of suggestions for improvements that I kind of sort of ignored, and also ways to achieve different sizes. And even like the Clara and the Agnes dress, although the write-up for both of them are very, very similar because I happen to have both patterns, they do have a different gauge, so that you could potentially achieve 4 different sizes given that they have 2 sizes each, although with the same stitch count. So it's like a whole story there. Is it the Agnes dress? Is it the Clara dress? I don't know. But what I do know is that I made it before and I really did like it. So without further ado, enjoy me talking about my yarn choice. So the first challenge that I had when starting this project, as ever, was of course yarn choice. And I've just been looking at the projects for this dress, whether it's the old tighter gauge version or the more recent looser gauge version. They all use vastly different yarns. They are just any sort of fingering weight yarn, honestly. It can be merino, it can be superwash, non-superwash, alpaca, cotton. I used cotton in the past, and it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of things that could go wrong with different yarn types. So I was mostly just browsing my stash based on the quantity. So kind of 400 meters, 100 grams ish. So, what most of hand-dyed yarns, they come in that quantity, fingering weight, and they're self-striping, variegated, speckled, semi-solid, tonal, and I don't know that that is what I want for this particular dress, because I want the lace to shine and I don't want really anything else to be taking over that. So I was looking for solid coloured yarn, which doesn't really need to be hand-dyed, and remembered this yarn that I happen to have in stash. This is Pickles Merino Bliss. It's got 70% merino, 20% mohair, and 10% wool. And look at that. Just look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? Isn't that a gorgeous green? Just deep, deep foresty green, a little bit moss green. It is just scrumptious. I really, really like it. Now, usually I would not want to use mohair for baby knits because of all the flyaway hairs. They can be quite troublesome when they get into the noses of little newborns that haven't grown their nose hairs yet, and they can irritate their airways. However, the dress that I'm knitting is not going to be a newborn size. The baby is going to have, fully grown nostril hairs. So I don't worry about that. I think it's going to be fine. Second concern is, sometimes it might just be easier to get a superwash yarn for, very overwhelmed first-time parents, so they can just chuck in the washer without having to think too hard about it, even though everything really can go in the washer. I didn't want to, add to that, but this yarn was actually given to me by the recipient of this dress. So I am very confident that she will know how to treat this yarn. She's very familiar with it. I don't worry at all. Now my only concern about this yarn is that it's single ply, and I have some hang-ups about single ply. You know, single ply means it really has just one ply per strand. You see that? And single plies have a way of growing. They lose kind of structure, and you can end up knitting something a bit bigger than you intended. But then again, babies grow. What's the problem? And I also think it will add a bit of drape, and again, it's a dress, you know, what's the problem? So I'm not too worried about that either. I think it's going to be a really good yarn choice. And I have started knitting on the skirt, and I'm going to show you bit by bit. But I have, as you can see, I've done the moss stitch border here, and I like it. The moss stitch made me quite confident that this was going to be a good fit for the yarn, that I'd chosen a good needle size. I don't swatch, guys, because again, like, I know that a 3.75mm needle gives me a 24 stitch gauge, which is the recommended gauge, so you know, and I have measured since, obviously, and it worked out pretty well. But I do think the fabric feels quite thin, but often I do find that when I'm on like beginning stages, and then when I knit more and more and more, I find that it's actually quite nice and just, yeah, drapey and kind of what I was expecting. It's looking rather big though. I feel like this is just a very big skirt for a baby. The size I chose is for half a year to 1 year. They changed the gauge from the original pattern. I used to have a 27 stitch gauge, which led to vastly tighter measurements than what the newer version has, which has a 24 stitch gauge, but the same stitch count. So I don't know if they like just think that babies are bigger now than they were just like a couple of decades ago. I'm really not sure, but as I keep saying, babies grow. It's gonna fit at some point. What you do with this skirt is that you knit up to the full length, and then you take in, I think, 100 stitches, but I did cast on like 200 and something stitches, so that's taking out almost half the stitches at the, calling it waist is a strong word, it's kind of just under the arms really. That's kind of where the measurements are taken. The skirt can be a lot bigger than that, of course. The other thing that I have done is, if you see this little triangle shaping that you get all the way around. And this is because I already made this skirt 5 years ago. I actually remembered this part because when I looked at the finished product that I had back then, this side did not look good. This side is just a column of knit two together. You can see that. You get a very nice line continuing from down here up to here. But on this side, the pattern also tells you to knit two together, and well, that makes the stitches kind of lean that way, and so you get these stitches leaning that way, you know, every way down, and like that, you don't get that line then, it gets interrupted every time. And so the newer version of the pattern has like sort of accounted for this by having you knit two stitches together through the back loop, which granted makes them point in this direction, so that's something, but it makes them all twisted. So I'm like, that's not the same as this, you know, that's not a mirror of this. So I did the obvious, guys. I just SSK'd my way all the way up here on all these triangles. And I'm really, really pleased with that decision. I think it looks really good. Would absolutely recommend. I think it's an essential modification for this dress, to be honest. Unless you have any other preferred method that looks mirrored, just to achieve the same result, basically. So that's where we're at right now. I am a little bit worried about my yarn amounts because this is all I have, and I've used one ball already, and this is the only ball I have left. And it obviously doesn't feel like I am anywhere near halfway, which is concerning. I have measured, and I am about 12 centimeters here, which is roughly 5 inches. And if it's going to be 20 centimeters long, which is 8 inches, I don't know, guys. I don't know if we have enough. I have obviously looked through on Ravelry, and there are people who used the same amount of yarn that I have, so it might be just enough. And I've seen people using more for this size. So what I think I might do is to provisionally cast on the waist. Again, it's not really placed in the waist, but you know what I mean. The must stitch band at the very top of the skirt, and just knit from that and do the whole torso thing. Torso thing, oh my god, it's called a yoke, okay? Then I will know how much yarn I'll have left, do whatever I have left for the skirt, and you know, save aside a little bit of yarn just to graft that together with the provisionally cast on moss stitch. That might be a plan. A little bit more complicated than what I had in mind, but it does seem to maybe be the best option to both make sure that I don't run out of yarn, but also to make sure that I use up all the yarn that I have. I kind of like the idea that the recipient of this dress is actually going to be the person who bought me this yarn, because I love that. I really like that idea. I love that also knitting that's like a nice gesture, not like returning a gift. At least I hope it's different in knitting. I like the idea. So this isn't exactly my favorite way of provisional cast on, but I thought I'd try this one today because we're not dealing with that many stitches and I don't know how many I need to cast on. So what you do is you basically crochet a slip stitch chain and pick up a stitch into every back leg of that. So you can see there are little stitches running at the back here, kind of, well, they're not stitches, they're just little bumps, one per crochet stitch, if you will. So I'm just making this very, very long chain. I just know it needs to be at least 110 of these. So I'm just gonna probably do way more than I need to. I didn't even check the hook size that I chose. I just chose one that I always use, which happens to be a size C, 2.75. So maybe that will be nice. I'm doing it also quite loosely, so it probably doesn't matter. I also just use some go-to finer that I happen to have at hand, and you really don't need to overthink these things too much. It's a little bit hard to see, even for me, to be honest. So I'm just gonna wing it. Like, I mean, it's provisional, so what's the worst that can happen? So behold the reason I rarely make tutorials, because okay, just if this was a real tutorial, which it's not, but if it was, I would be using like big needles, big yarn in white, not like super deep colors you can't see anything. Yeah, so anyone want to get into tutorials, I was gonna say there's no competition here, but also you can take my advice and not do any of the things that I normally do. So the reason that I like this method, even though I know I just said I don't like it, I don't like it because it's time consuming. But the reason I do like it is actually because you can get a close attention to what the rest of your work is with this method. So normally, like if you do provisional cast on with some scrap yarn running through, the first rows or rounds can be quite loose compared to the rest of your work. I typically find that this method with the crochet chain at the bottom, I'm usually getting a pretty consistent gauge to the rest of my work. Maybe that's just me, but that's why I'm really just making the effort. So I'm just going to do that for the whole thing. We'll see when we end up with whatever number of stitches that I need for this. I just want to demonstrate just like how good I am at estimating 110 stitches. This is 110. This is whatever excess I cast on that I didn't need to do. So all of this, just frog, like, why did I do that? That's like the worst type of estimating stitches I have ever seen. Oh, okay. Maybe I should have just counted. That would have been good. Oh well. So I just joined in the round, and all I'm doing is just knit and purl for the moss stitch or seed stitch or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to be doing that for however many rounds I need to do. We'll have two separate pieces that I will be grafting together in the end. A little bit extra work, but I think it's just the best way to make sure I use up all my yarn and don't use up too much before it's done. Alright then, so that is the moss stitch. So that's what I've got here. So like, you know, if I take the dress, the skirt, right? There is this section missing here that I'll be dealing with at the very end. So now I am just about to set aside some stitches for the underarm. Like pretend that this is attached. All right, the little top is done. Look how cute it is. It is so cute. Oh. So obviously not blocked or anything. And actually I made a huge mistake to begin with. I had like knitted up all the way up to here and realized this is not supposed to be knitted exactly like the skirt. There's supposed to be more decreases in here that the skirt didn't have, so I had to frog back a considerable amount and do it again. Other modifications, I did the moss stitch, seed stitch around the arms a lot shorter. It's supposed to be 10 rounds, but I did just 4, same as the neckline. This is what's recommended for the neckline, but they recommended like 10 for the arms for some reason, I guess to match the waistband and the hem. I just felt that that's a bit excessive. I think this is fine, and it's so cute, and it's got this little button fastening at the back. The pattern does describe how to do this, but I just did it the way that made sense. So now I just need to find a button so we can close up the back here. Now, I did this obviously because I didn't know whether I would have enough for the yarn, but I have a lot of yarn. This feels quite substantial. It's not that far away from the full skein, so that's good news. So what we got so far is the skirt and the top, and I just have to keep on knitting the skirt now until I run out of yarn, and whatever I have left of yarn I will just graft together with the top, and that's the dress finished. And she is done. Look at that. I can just about fit her into the frame here. I am so pleased with this. Turns out it was very simple to kind of Kitchener stitch graft on this skirt to the body. I kept the provisional cast on as I did it, and I basically, you know, when you do Kitchener stitch, I did it just in 2 stitches rather than 1 on the skirt side, and followed the yarn that I had picked up from the provisional cast on. So I after that could just pull out both the provisional cast on and the first kind of round of yarn that I could pick up, so that basically this round that I had grafted is actually also the first round of the moss stitch band here, which is how it would have been in the pattern had I just, you know, followed instructions. So that worked out really well. And now of course she has also been blocked, so it's looking really nice. The yarn is obviously not the most defined yarn. It is a single ply merino, and it's got some mohair in it as well, so it's not going to be like the most defined yarn, but if you want to have a kind of close up, this is what it looks like. Very shiny as well, shiny and fussy. It's really quite a nice blend, this pickles yarn. The only thing I have left to do now is to find a little button that will suit this little hook or whatever, and then just attach that there, because the neckline opening is a little bit small. I think it's going to be very comfortable for the baby to wear, but you obviously want to be able to get it over the head, so that's why that's there. I've read a lot of pattern notes for this dress, and I've heard people say that it should probably be all the way at the bottom, which hindsight, yeah, maybe. So we hope this baby's not going to have as massive head as I do, because that wouldn't work. And yes, that is the dress completed. I do happen to have it here as well, so there it is. Isn't she adorable? This dress is so freaking cute. I have, like I said, made it before. I made it in light blue cotton yarn, which is a very different yarn from what I ended up using here, this merino mohair blend. It's just freaking cute. I still haven't attached that one button at the back here, so sorry, you will never know what button I end up choosing, if any at all. So that's her. Clara, Agnes, whatever you want to call her. I didn't end up modifying it as much in the end. Obviously it was just that kind of avoiding yarn chicken trick that I did to do the top before I did the bottom, and just sewing it all together. Honestly, like Kitchener stitch, the more you do it, the more you just figure out how that can save you from a lot of knitting grief by jumping a little bit ahead in your knitting project, so that you can just kind of sew it all together later, nobody can tell. So it's a trick I like to use in a lot of my knitting. And yeah, at the end of the day, here she is, super adorable. And I hope my friend will like this. I did just ask her the address to send this to the other day, so she knows something is coming. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this little video as well, a little bit outside of my usual format, but I hope to be doing more of these to feature a single project at the time. Yeah, like I said, hope you really like them. I like doing them, and it helps me to actually remember what I did with the project throughout making it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. See you guys next time. Bye!